Alright, buckle up, because this one still has me feeling all kinds of emotions, and I genuinely need some outside perspective. I'm questioning everything about what happened, and honestly, I feel like I'm spiraling between guilt, anger, and total disbelief. So, here's the story. My friend Sarah just celebrated her birthday recently. Let me give you some background so you understand the dynamics. Sarah and I have been close for years. We met in college, and she's the kind of friend who can light up any room. She's bubbly, super social, and always has this magnetic energy that draws people to her. We've been through a lot together: breakups, career struggles, late-night heart-to-hearts. She's someone I genuinely care about, and because of that, I've always gone out of my way to make her feel special, especially on her birthdays. In the past, I've organized surprise parties for her, gotten her thoughtful gifts, and made sure her day was all about celebrating her. I love doing it because I know how much it means to her. So when she sent out a group text about 2 weeks before her birthday, inviting a bunch of us to dinner at her absolute favorite restaurant, I was excited. The invite was casual: "Hey, let's celebrate my birthday at restaurant. It's my favorite place, and I'd love to see you all there." It sounded fun, and I thought it'd be a great way to catch up with everyone and celebrate Sarah. Here's where things start to get a little tricky. To be totally transparent, I'm on a tight budget right now. I've had a lot of unexpected expenses lately: car repairs, medical bills, you name it, and I've been really careful about where my money goes. I'm not broke, but I definitely can't afford to be throwing cash around. Still, I told myself, it's Sarah's birthday. You'll figure it out. I didn't want to miss her big night, and I assumed I could get away with ordering something small and sticking to water. I mean, how bad could it be? Fast forward to the night of the dinner. I show up at the restaurant, and right away, I'm hit with just how fancy this place is. It's one of those upscale spots where everything feels expensive. The lighting is dim, the decor is all sleek and modern, and the waitstaff are in perfectly pressed uniforms. I hadn't looked up the menu beforehand, rookie mistake, but as soon as I sat down and opened it, my stomach dropped. Everything was insanely expensive. Like, we're talking $50 for the simplest entree. Appetizers were $20, $30, and cocktails were $15, $20 each. At this point, I'm already mentally recalculating my budget and trying not to panic. I decided I'd just order the cheapest dish I could find: a plain pasta dish for $48 and stick to water. No appetizers, no drinks, no dessert. I figured I could still enjoy the evening without completely wrecking my finances. The group was in high spirits, and the conversation flowed easily. Sarah was clearly in her element, laughing, joking, and ordering up a storm. She got a fancy cocktail, an appetizer, a steak entree, and dessert. I was happy for her. It was her birthday, after all, but I couldn't help but feel a little stressed every time I saw the waiter bring another dish to our table. I kept telling myself, it's fine. You've got your own meal covered. Just focus on enjoying the company. Then came the moment that completely blindsided me. The waiter brought the check to the table, and before anyone could start figuring out their portion, Sarah smiled and said, "Okay, so since it's my birthday, I'm assuming you all don't mind splitting my bill." I froze. I honestly thought I had misheard her at first. Splitting her bill alone was well over $150, and she hadn't mentioned anything about this beforehand. I glanced around the table, and everyone else looked just as shocked as I felt. There was this heavy, awkward pause, but then people started nodding and mumbling, "Of course," and "Sure, no problem." It was clear that no one wanted to be the one to push back. Except for me. I leaned over to Sarah and said, as quietly and politely as I could, "Hey, I'm really sorry, but I can't afford to chip in for your bill. I'm on a tight budget right now, and I didn't plan for this." My voice felt small, but steady enough, and I hoped that the apologetic tone would soften the blow. Inside, my stomach was twisting into knots. I hated the idea of letting her down, especially on her birthday, but I just couldn't justify spending money I didn't have. I felt awful even having to say it out loud, like I was admitting some sort of personal failure. Still, I thought Sarah would understand. We'd been friends for years. She knew me. She knew my situation wasn't about being unwilling or uncaring, but simply about not being able to contribute. I genuinely believed she'd appreciate my honesty and move on. Well, she didn't. Her face immediately fell, her expression morphing from the lighthearted, bubbly Sarah I knew into something unrecognizable, part shock, part irritation, and maybe even a hint of disbelief. She stared at me for a moment, her mouth slightly open, like she couldn't comprehend what I'd just said. Then, she sat up straighter, her shoulders stiffening, and said, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear, "Are you serious? It's my birthday. You're really going to be stingy over a few dollars?" My heart sank as the words hit me like a slap. The room felt like it went silent, though I knew that was probably just in my head. Everyone else at the table turned to look at me, their faces ranging from mild curiosity to outright judgment. I could feel my cheeks flushing hot, and I was suddenly very aware of how small I felt sitting there. My brain was racing, trying to find the right words to explain myself without making the situation worse. I started, my voice cracking slightly. I cleared my throat and tried again, speaking softly but firmly. "It's not about being stingy, Sarah. I really can't afford it right now. Things are tight for me, and I didn't know this was part of the plan." I was practically pleading for her to understand, but before I could even finish, she cut me off, her tone sharper now. "If you couldn't afford to come, you shouldn't have come," she snapped, her voice carrying enough weight that it made me shrink further into my chair. "Now you're making things awkward for everyone." At this point, some of the others started chiming in, agreeing with her. "It's kind of customary to treat the birthday person," one friend said. Another added, "Yeah, it's just what you do. It's a special occasion." I felt completely blindsided and ganged up on. I wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. I ended up quietly paying for my own meal and leaving early. On my way out, I heard Sarah complaining to someone else about how I'd ruined her birthday by being difficult. When I got home, I just broke down. I felt humiliated and guilty, but also angry. I've always gone out of my way to make Sarah's birthdays special, but this felt so unfair. How was I supposed to know she expected us to split her bill? If she'd mentioned it in the invite, I would have politely declined the dinner and celebrated with her another way. Springing a $150 expense on us at the last minute felt manipulative, and her reaction made me feel like I was the worst friend in the world. Since then, I've gotten mixed feedback from our friend group. Some people have told me I should have just sucked it up and paid to avoid drama. Others have said Sarah was out of line for expecting us to cover her bill without giving us a heads up. I haven't talked to Sarah since the dinner, and honestly, I don't know where our friendship stands. So, Reddit, AITA for refusing to split her bill. Or was Sarah out of line for expecting it in the first place? I genuinely don't know anymore. Update 1. A few days after the dinner, I was still feeling unsettled about everything that had happened. I kept replaying the moment Sarah called me stingy and how the entire table had stared at me like I'd committed some cardinal sin. I couldn't shake the feeling of humiliation, and it lingered like a weight on my chest. I'd done my best to brush it off and move on, but the entire situation just felt so unfair. I hadn't gone to that dinner expecting anyone else to pay for me, and I certainly hadn't anticipated being blindsided with Sarah's unspoken expectation to cover her massive bill. Still, I tried to bury it and focus on other things, hoping the awkwardness would eventually fade. That hope was dashed when Sarah called me a few days later. I remember staring at her name on my phone screen, my stomach twisting into knots. I debated not picking up, but a part of me thought, maybe she wants to apologize. Maybe she realized she overreacted. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hey, Sarah," I said cautiously, already bracing myself. Her tone was calm at first, but it carried that unmistakable edge that told me this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. She said she wanted to talk about what had happened at the restaurant, and for a brief moment, I felt a flicker of relief. Maybe this was her way of mending things, but as soon as she started talking, I realized I was wrong. Sarah launched into a detailed account of how hurt she was by my behavior that night. She told me that she'd been deeply disappointed in me and that what I did wasn't how friends should act. She said I'd embarrassed her in front of everyone on her special day and that I'd made her birthday dinner awkward and uncomfortable for the entire group. I listened in stunned silence as she laid out her grievances, each word hitting me like a fresh blow. She told me that as her friend, it should have been obvious that we'd be covering her bill. It was my birthday, she said, as if that explained everything. She argued that it was a universal expectation for the birthday person to be treated by their friends, especially at a special dinner like this. According to her, I should have figured it out without her having to say anything because, in her words, that's just what people do. I felt my chest tighten as I tried to process what she was saying. None of this had been clear at the time of the dinner or even before it. If Sarah had told us in advance that the plan was to split her bill, I could have prepared, or more likely, I would have opted out. But she hadn't. Instead, she dropped it on us at the last second, leaving no room for discussion. I thought about how she'd ordered cocktails, appetizers, the most expensive entree on the menu, and dessert, all without any concern for how much it would cost or how it might affect the rest of us. Then came the part that left me absolutely speechless. Sarah told me that I owed her $50. Yes, you read that right, she wanted me to pay her back $50, claiming that it was the portion of her bill she'd been forced to cover because I hadn't contributed, but that wasn't all. She said the $50 was also compensation for the awkward situation I'd caused, which she insisted had ruined her birthday dinner. She framed it as though my refusal to chip in was a personal attack on her and that I needed to make it right if I wanted to repair our friendship. I sat there gripping my phone, completely stunned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sarah was treating her bill like it was my responsibility, as though her decision to splurge on an expensive meal was somehow my problem. It wasn't like I'd eaten or drank anything off her tab. I'd barely spent $50 on my own meal, and I'd budgeted carefully to make sure I could afford it. Now she was demanding that I pay extra, not just for her steak and cocktails, but also as some kind of bizarre penalty for making her uncomfortable. I tried to keep my voice steady as I responded, telling her that I didn't owe her anything. Her bill was her responsibility, and if she couldn't afford to cover it, she should have been more mindful about what she ordered. I told her that I'd done everything I could to celebrate her within my means and that it wasn't fair for her to spring this expectation on me without warning. I explained that I wasn't trying to ruin her birthday, but I also wasn't going to take responsibility for a situation she'd created by making assumptions. Sarah didn't take this well. She doubled down, saying that I was being selfish and inconsiderate, and she couldn't believe I was refusing to make amends. She told me that she would keep reminding me about the $50 until I paid her back because, in her mind, that was the only way to fix the friendship. She kept saying that it was about the principle, that friends don't act the way I did, and that I needed to do the right thing. At that point, I was done. I couldn't believe how entitled and manipulative she was being. The more she talked, the more I realized this wasn't just about the dinner. This was about her feeling like she was owed something, simply because it was her birthday. I calmly told her that I wasn't going to pay her and that if she couldn't see why her behavior was unreasonable, then maybe we needed to take some space. She kept pushing, but I eventually hung up, feeling emotionally drained and deeply frustrated. Update 2. The fallout from the dinner and Sarah's phone call turned into something I could have never imagined. After our tense conversation, where I firmly told Sarah I wasn't paying her the $50, I thought the issue would fizzle out. I assumed she'd cool off, maybe reflect on how unreasonable she was being, and we'd move past it eventually. But no, Sarah had other plans, and what followed was one of the most bizarre and exhausting experiences of my life. It started subtly. A day or two after the call, Sarah began texting me reminders about the $50. At first, they were framed as casual, almost playful nudges. Hey, don't forget about the $50. Or still waiting on you to do the right thing. I rolled my eyes and ignored them, thinking if I didn't engage, she'd drop it. But the messages kept coming, and they quickly escalated in tone. They turned from light-hearted jabs to pointed accusations. I can't believe you're still refusing to pay me back. This says a lot about you as a person. Then, you're not just hurting me, you're ruining our friendship. All over $50. Unbelievable. I tried to ignore her for as long as I could, but the constant buzzing of my phone became unbearable. Every time I saw her name pop up, I felt a mix of anger and anxiety. I finally blocked her number, thinking that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Sarah wasn't about to let this go that easily. Not long after I blocked her, Sarah found new ways to escalate things. She started messaging me from different accounts, and it felt like she was determined to invade every digital corner of my life. At first, it was through her existing social media accounts. She sent me long, rambling DMs where she alternated between painting herself as the victim and accusing me of being a terrible friend. Some messages were filled with guilt-tripping statements like, "I can't believe you're letting $50 ruin our friendship," while others were outright hostile, calling me selfish and heartless. She seemed to think that if she threw enough accusations at me, I'd finally cave. When I blocked her main accounts, I naively thought that would be the end of it. Instead, she started creating new accounts, random profiles with generic names and pictures. Each time I blocked one, another popped up within hours. The messages became a relentless stream of manipulation and blame. She'd say things like, "How could you do this to someone who's always been there for you? And I've never treated you this way, so why are you doing this to me?" It was exhausting. It felt like no matter how many doors I tried to close, she kept finding another one to force open. Her tactics varied too. Some messages were pages-long essays about how deeply I'd hurt her, peppered with passive-aggressive remarks about what kind of person I must be. Others were sharp and cutting, designed to make me feel small. "I hope you know everyone sees what you're really like now." It was emotionally draining. I started to dread checking my phone because it felt like there was no escape. Blocking her over and over didn't even feel satisfying anymore, it just felt futile. Then came the group chat drama, which was a whole new level of mortification. Sarah sent a massive, detailed message to the group chat we shared with our mutual friends. It was so long that it came in multiple parts, each one dripping with dramatics. She recounted the dinner in painstaking detail, twisting the story to make herself look like the victim and me the villain. According to her, I had humiliated her on her birthday by refusing to celebrate her properly. She made it sound as though my actions had been premeditated, like I'd gone to the dinner with the explicit goal of ruining her night. She even threw in little digs about how everyone else had been willing to step up, painting me as the one selfish outlier who had refused to do the bare minimum. What made it worse was the way she harped on the $50. She didn't just mention it in passing. She framed it as the crux of the entire issue, saying things like, "It's not about the money, it's about respect and principle. It's about what friends do for each other." She made it sound like I'd committed some grave betrayal, all because I hadn't chipped in for her steak and cocktails. It was mortifying to see her air this dirty laundry in front of everyone, especially since so many of the people in the chat didn't know the full story. I wanted to jump in and defend myself, to explain how unfair and unreasonable she was being, but I decided against it. I figured it would only add fuel to the fire, and honestly, I didn't have the energy to engage. I hoped the people who really knew me would see through her theatrics. But Sarah wasn't content to stop there. She began privately messaging people from the group chat, recruiting them as her personal army to put more pressure on me. It started slowly, just one or two people reaching out. At first, the messages seemed innocent enough, like they were genuinely curious about what had happened. They would say things like, "Hey, I heard there was some misunderstanding at Sarah's dinner. Maybe you should just talk to her," or "Sarah told me about the $50 thing. Is everything okay between you two?" But as more and more people started messaging me, it became clear this wasn't just concern, it was a coordinated effort. Sarah wasn't just venting to them, she was actively persuading them to step in on her behalf. Suddenly, I was bombarded with messages from people I barely knew, some of whom had only met me a handful of times. They weren't just asking questions anymore, they were actively taking sides. "I don't understand why you can't just pay her back. It's only $50, one message read. Another said, "Honestly, it seems kind of petty not to settle this. It was her birthday, after all." The tone varied depending on the person. Some people were clearly uncomfortable being dragged into the drama. Their messages were more cautious, almost apologetic, like they didn't really want to be involved but felt obligated to say something. Others, though, came at me full force, outright accusing me of being selfish, cheap, and even cruel. "How can you call yourself her friend and not treat her on her birthday?" one person wrote, adding, "This whole situation makes you look really bad." The worst ones weren't even trying to be subtle, they flat out told me I was in the wrong and needed to grow up or stop being so stubborn. It felt like an ambush. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing, and every time I saw another notification, my stomach would clench with dread. No matter how many times I explained that I didn't owe Sarah anything, that her bill wasn't my responsibility, and she had never told us we'd be covering her meal, it didn't seem to matter. They either didn't believe me, or they didn't care. Most of them just wanted the drama to end, and they saw me as the easiest target to fix the situation. It was overwhelming, and no matter what I said, I felt like I was talking to a brick wall. As if that wasn't enough, Sarah took things to a whole new level by airing everything on her social media. She posted a long, self-pitying message about how her birthday had been ruined by a so-called friend who had refused to celebrate her properly. The post was carefully worded. She didn't name me outright, but she included just enough details that anyone in our circle could figure out who she was talking about. She painted herself as the victim of my supposed selfishness, claiming that all she had wanted was a nice evening with her friends and that I had turned it into a stressful and hurtful experience. The post wasn't just a passive-aggressive dig, it was a full-blown attack on my character. Sarah twisted the story to make it seem like I had outright refused to pay my share of her birthday dinner, leaving her to cover the cost alone, while everyone else had stepped up. She left out the part where she had blindsided us with her expectation to split her bill after the meal was over, and she certainly didn't mention how expensive her orders had been. Instead, she framed it as though I'd deliberately chosen to disrespect her on her special day. The post blew up among her circle of friends. People flocked to the comments to offer their support and outrage on her behalf. "You deserve better friends," one person wrote. Another said, "Wow, some people are so selfish. I can't believe someone would treat you like that on your birthday." There were dozens of comments like this, each one piling onto the narrative that I was the bad guy in this situation. It was infuriating to watch the story spiral further out of control, knowing I had no way to defend myself without making things even worse. And then came the reposts. Sarah's friends and even some of our mutual friends started sharing her post in their stories, tagging her and adding their own commentary. Some of them said things like, "We love you, Sarah. You deserve all the happiness in the world." While others were more direct, writing, "Can't believe someone would do this to you." Some people just don't know how to be real friends. Seeing those reposts was like a punch. People I'd considered friends, or at least friendly acquaintances, were publicly siding with Sarah without even hearing my side of the story. By this point, I was at my breaking point. My phone was constantly buzzing with messages from random people, Sarah's endless new accounts, and mutual friends pressuring me to make things right. I couldn't escape it, no matter what I did. I started to dread every notification, every ping, every mention of Sarah's name. It was like this $50 had taken over my entire life. I tried to stay strong, to hold my ground, but the stress was overwhelming. I wasn't sleeping well, and I found myself snapping at people over little things. I felt trapped. Finally, I broke. I decided to give Sarah the $50, not because I believed I owed it to her, but because I couldn't take it anymore. I just wanted it to stop the messages, the posts, the endless harassment. I figured paying her off was the quickest way to end this nightmare, so I transferred the money to her with a short message. "Here's your $50, please leave me alone." Her response, she laughed. Literally, she sent me a voice message laughing and said, "I knew you'd give in eventually. You should have just done this from the beginning instead of putting on a whole show." My jaw dropped. I couldn't believe her audacity. After everything she'd put me through, she was acting like I was the unreasonable one. She had the nerve to tell me that I was the one who'd made this whole situation a bigger deal than it needed to be. I was furious. I wrote back, telling her that she was the one who'd turned this into an absurd, drawn-out spectacle. I reminded her that she was the one who had hounded me for weeks, created fake accounts, rallied our friends against me, and smeared me on social media all over her own dinner bill. I told her she should be ashamed of herself and that this $50 wasn't a reflection of my guilt, but of my exhaustion from her relentless harassment. She didn't reply. I've since cut Sarah off completely. I blocked her on every platform and told our mutual friends that I don't want to hear her name again. Some of them have been understanding, while others think I overreacted. Honestly, I don't care anymore. I'm just relieved to be done with her. But part of me is still in shock over how far she was willing to go over something so petty. It's made me rethink a lot about our friendship and what kind of person she really is. So, Reddit, was I wrong to give in, or was this just the only way to finally get some peace? Either way, I feel like I've lost something much bigger than $50.